group of an additional group of 8 scholars who arrived from Ivory Coast and Benin. Overnight they should have been here already yesterday morning, but you know, the one plane was delayed, that delayed, the next plane, that delayed, the next plane, and so on and so on and so on. I'm really pleased they all arrived last night, and we welcome you here this morning. And I hope you enjoy the remaining 2 to 3 days of the conference. The field trip, because we had to cancel, there are 3 buses, all leaving from the same place at the same time tomorrow morning at 8:30. The actual place is on the notice board outside. It's just near the central bus station in Eilat, which is about mostly it's a 10-minute walk from most of the hotels and also from some of the Airbnbs. The buses will leave at 8:30. You'll get there at 8:31 and you can go and sit on the beach for the rest of the day. At the end of the day, trips number 1 and 2, Professor Biga and Dr. Zivan, it's just 2 different people taking them. It's really the same trip going in opposite directions so that we don't overcrowd one trip. And the third one, which is dealing with environmental issues, please make sure that you get on the right buses, particularly those who signed up for trip number 3. Tonight, immediately after the closing session, we'll have an evening meal here. We're very pleased the rector of the university, Professor Chaim Hames, is coming especially from Beersheba, not just to greet, but also to talk about various things. And we believe that the Consul General of Egypt will also be present. These things can change from minute to minute, but we hope he will be there also this evening. That will be immediately after the final session. We hope to wrap up the dinner around 9 o'clock. Give or take, the buses will take you back. And if there are a few aficionados like me that want to see Milan play Tottenham, we'll arrange a place to go and see that happen. Thursday morning, it says on the online schedule at Thursday lunch, but we've changed that. Just towards the end of the Thursday morning coffee break, whoever is here will gather outside for a group photo. For as many as you are here, those of you who want to wear these T-shirts that we put in the package, you are welcome to do so for the photo. And the final comment is that there are a number of individuals who have approached me who want to, who are staying after the conference but not going on the field trip, and they were just interested to know if there are others who are interested in organising a trip to Petra together. Some people already did it before the conference, so I would just suggest that those of you who want to, maybe, I'm not really sure what to say, maybe after this session or sometime during lunch, meet at the corner of the auditorium here. And if you can put something together, there are plenty of agents and travel agencies in Eilat who can arrange this for you. And if you can get a group together, that would probably be the best solution. And despite what you heard on the other microphone 5 minutes ago, this session is going to continue till about 12:50, not 12:30, and then there'll be just 1 sitting of lunch, not 2 sittings. And with that, welcome to the Consul General of Egypt here this morning. Thank you very much for arriving. And we'll start now. Yes, Gidon?
No, that's going to be after. After the session. We are gathering here for the explanation about the...
Oh, sorry, thank you. That's the point I missed. Oh, thank you very much. Those of you who want some pre-information about tomorrow's tours and some introduction to Israel's borders in the area. So during the lunch break today, which is from 1 to 2:30 or from 1:45 to 2:15, from about 1:30 in this auditorium, Professor Biga and Dr. Arieli will give brief presentations of about 20 minutes each about the development of the borders in this area, and it will be very good preliminary information for those of you who want to sort of read up and listen up before you actually get on the buses tomorrow. So in the auditorium about 1:30, Gidon and Tamar. And now I hand over to my good friend and colleague, Professor Heather Nicole, to introduce the session.
Thank you, David, and welcome to our plenary session, Environment, Climate Change, and Borders. We've got two distinguished speakers today. Tarek Abdul-Hamad, Director of the Eilat Institute for Environmental Studies in Israel, so a local boy. And we have Elisama Coronado, the School of Transport Studies, Arizona State University, who I think is a friend to many of us here and very well known. I think it's going to be a wonderful session. Each of our speakers will talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A after that. And do all that and still clear the room by 10 to 1 for lunch. So I would like to welcome our first speaker, Tarek Abdul-Hamad, the Director of the Eilat Institute for Environmental Studies, who's going to talk on environmental diplomacy, working regionally to address climate crisis. So welcome.
Thank you all. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you today for many reasons. The first one is always glad to be at the Eilat campus. And the second important reason is to talk about the climate, the environment, and how we at the Eilat Institute deal with environmental challenges that are facing the whole region. I'm thankful for the Ben Gurion University of the Nigerian Association for the Woodland Studies for inviting me. My name is Mohammed. I'm the Executive Director of the Eilat Institute. I'm a Palestinian from East Jerusalem. And what I will talk about is the use of science diplomacy, environmental diplomacy, that means as a catalyst to connect between people in the region that we live in. Okay, so we have the presentation. This season is actually passing through a very critical period regionally, and also in Israel and Palestine. Probably all about the demonstrations that are happening in the country. And since the beginning of the unfortunately thousands of people were killed in the sides. So under these current circumstances, to do regional cooperation, regional environmental cooperation is extremely challenging in Israel, especially in an area like the Middle East, a region that's still navigating its way between peace and war. Peace is small, it's fragile, it's messy. Why? Because between human beings that they have very hard time to connect, to reconcile, to overcome the challenges that they are facing in this region. This is what I will talk about, the use of the climate, the use of environmental diplomacy to solve environmental challenges. What is lacking in this part of the world, in the Middle East? Peace treaties, we have plenty of them. With Egypt, with the Palestinians, with the Jordanians, with the Abraham Accords. Are we lacking natural resources? No, we have plenty of sun. We can produce the electricity that we need. And here in the Arab region, including this city, Eilat, we produce 100% of our electricity from the sun during the day. And we have the right technology to produce also the water that we need in this region, the desalination technology. What is lacking in this region is trust. And trust is the most scarce resource in this region. The connection between people, the political models are the main challenge that we have in this region. And so what we try to do at the Eilat Institute, we are academic and research institution. Our academic program is affiliated with Ben Gurion University of the area. 1/3 of our students are Jewish Israelis, 1/3 Arabic speakers, Israeli Arabs, Palestinians from both West Bank and Gaza, Jordan, Morocco, Sudan, and we have 1/3 international students. Students come to the Arabic Institute, they stay 1 semester or 2 semesters, they go back to their universities, like study abroad program, and this program is accredited by Ben Gurion University of the Negev. And I'm very proud to say that the vast majority of Palestinian and Jordanian students who did already conducting their graduate studies in Israel came to Israel through the program of the Institute. I've also trained an internship program where you can come and do research in one of the research centers that we have. We are an institution for environmental studies. We have several research centers on renewable energy, transforming water management, political ecology, and social ecology, Center for Sustainable Agriculture, transforming water management. We do work in the whole region. We cover the whole spectrum of research, from basic research, applied research, research and development, and we do a lot of research and work with the communities in the region. And most of the research that we do is transformed across border with our Palestinian partners, with our Jordanian partners, with our Moroccan partners, with our Emirati partners to solve the region's environmental challenges. Let me establish the Regional Climate Change Center. Climate change is a threat, and at the same time, it's a great opportunity to connect with people, to bring people together. It's a global language. Science is a global language that we all can use to connect. Science is a great tool that can show us the human in the we establishing the center. We are 30 miles, like 50 kilometers from the Gulf of Eilat, Aqaba. We are 60 kilometers from Egypt. We are from 70 kilometers from Saudi Arabia, and all the time where the institute is to Jordan, and we all have our flights to the center of the country. And we see this campus that we see in this photo as a regional hub for climate change research, to bring researchers in the whole region to deal with the climate threat that the region is facing. Why are we doing this? This is a program from the United Nations Environmental Program. The Middle East is considered as a hotspot when it comes to climate change. The Eastern temperature is increasing, the acidity is increasing, floods, heat waves. We feel it today. It's not something that we expect or expect in the future. Every one of us in this region sees the impact of climate change on the electricity bill. And why can't we all kind of deal with this challenge? We have to work together to deal with the impact of climate change. And why do we do that also? Because most of the aquifers in this region are shared. Here you see a map of the shared waters between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. The coastal aquifer is shared between Israel and Gaza. The mountain aquifer is shared between Israel and the West Bank. The Jordan Valley aquifer that we are sitting on now is shared between Jordan and Israel. The Araba aquifer, the Jordan Valley aquifer is also shared between the three countries. So the sentiment where the pollution starts with the impact of the climate changes, it impacts everyone in this region. In order to solve environmental issues, we have to work with our neighbors, with our Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli neighbors to deal with these issues. I started saying that we produce 100% of electricity from the sun in this region, but not in the whole country. The percentage of renewable energy is less than 7% in Israel, and Jordan, they still rely on fossil fuels for their electricity production. And I want you to look here to what happened in 2011. We said Israel switched from the use of natural gas to oil to produce electricity, and Jordan also did the same. You know why that happened? What happened in 2011? the ice strip over Sinai, and they exploded all the gas pipelines that bring the natural gas for this production to Jordan and Israel, and the two countries were almost without, especially Jordan, without electricity. And we see that very clearly when we look at the carbon dioxide emissions in the same year. You see this peak in 2011. So that's why we need to cooperate with each other to deal with challenges like this, not only environmental but also political challenges. And that's why we established also what we call the Effective Environmental Forum to engage civil society organizations together to prepare the ground for the future, hopefully, the future agreements on environment-related issues. And through this forum, we managed to implement several projects in the region. Two of them are in Gaza Strip. There's local disconnection between Israel and the Israeli authorities and the Palestinian authorities in Gaza. But we, as a non-governmental organization, work with non-governmental organizations in Gaza, and we managed to implement projects. It's not easy, it takes a lot of time. It's a significant bottom-up approach to convince people to do cooperation and solve environmental challenges. Gaza suffers from the lack of electricity and also lack of water. Almost 97% of the aquifer in Gaza is polluted and subject for human consumption. Almost like 75% of the beaches in Gaza are polluted with sewage. Gaza doesn't receive enough of electricity and they can't treat the wastewater. So what happens to the wastewater is it's dumped into the fields, infiltrates into the aquifer, pollutes the aquifer, which is shared with Israel. Or there's dumped into the Eastern Mediterranean and goes up to Ashkelon, pollutes the seawater, and desalination plants in Ashkelon cannot continue working. They start the desalination because of the organic pollution in the sea. So we all see here that nature or pollution knows no borders. In order to solve such an issue, I have to work with my Palestinian partners, even in Gaza. So we managed to send into Gaza atmospheric water generators, system that is drinking water for communities. Both of them are installed in hospitals and clinics, and these systems produce up to 5 cubic meters, 5 cubes of drinking clean water for the communities. To work with Gaza is not easy. During the last war with Gaza, we've been in touch with our Gaza partners, asking them about these systems, are they functioning, are they running, are they continuing to produce water, are they against the war, we cannot reach them. The war ended on Friday evening. Saturday morning, we received photos of people standing in line filling water from this Israeli technology inside Gaza Strip. On Monday, 3 days later, after the war, we received 5 requests from 5 different facilities in Gaza asking for such systems. The success is not to send such a system into Gaza. The success in my eyes is to be in touch with the Gaza partners, even during the war, as an Israeli organization, to keep that channel open for communication. We managed also to send into Gaza an off-grid wastewater treatment plant. And by the way, the water system also was off-grid, using solar energy batteries to run to treat the wastewater, to solve the wastewater challenge in Gaza. And the cycled water will be used by a group of women to grow animal feed that creates jobs and incomes. It's very important to mention that we do all of this work in full coordination with the Israeli authorities, with the Israeli army. So everything we send into Gaza, we get an approval from our government here in Israel. And these photos are actually the implementation of the projects inside Gaza, and they set it open. These projects are in cooperation with the Avam Institute from Israel. And that shows the level of trust that we managed to build with our Palestinian partners. And significant project. Okay. This is another significant significant project in the West Bank. It's an environmental challenge that passes from the West Bank into Gaza. This is here Ramallah, a major city in the West Bank. It's probably like 13 kilometers from Jerusalem. Ramallah has a high quality wastewater treatment plant that treats the wastewater of Ramallah and Auditorium and some of the Jewish settlements in that area. The inlet for the wastewater treatment plant is in area B, which is under the Palestinian control. The outlet of the plant, which is like less than 50 meters, is under the Israeli control. So the Palestinians control the inlet, they control the inlet, and they don't control the outlet, which is high quality water that can be used for agriculture. This treated wastewater flows into the valley and mixes again with untreated wastewater from certain neighborhoods in Jerusalem, under the control of Jerusalem municipality. And the treated water becomes polluted again. It flows toward what are called Valley, which is historical and touristic region, and also natural reserve, and has a lot of natural springs. And this untreated wastewater produces the aquifer in that region that is shared again between Israel and the Palestinians. And the Israeli water company had to close 2 wells here because of the pollution. This project here was a priority for the Israelis because they want to solve the pollution problem, and was a priority for the Palestinians because they want to use the water for agriculture in the Jordan Valley. But because two people, the two governments, the two authorities don't talk to each other, this project was stuck since the Oslo Accords, almost like 30 years. So we, as an institute, came and said, let's solve this challenge. As an Israeli institution, we went to the civil administration. We said we want to solve this problem. Our Palestinian partners went to the Palestinian Water Authority and said we are willing to help in solving this issue. So we hired an engineering company, we hired a consultant from the Palestinian Water Authority, and we said, what is the solution that the Palestinians see as a proper solution? And it was the solution. We went to the Israelis and we asked them, what is the good solution in your mind? And the Israelis gave us like 3 routes to build a pipeline to take the wastewater, the treated wastewater from this region into the Jordan Valley. We took these solutions and we went back to the Palestinian Water Authority. They picked one, and we managed to convince both sides to one solution that will take the treated wastewater from Ramallah to the Jordan Valley, almost 2.5 million cubic meters of recycled water that will be used for agriculture, for Palestinian agriculture in the Jordan Valley. The Israeli civil administration, the Israeli army issued building permit for the Palestinians to build such a pipeline that will take the treated wastewater to the Palestinians. I'm currently focusing on the second stage of this project to solve the environmental pollution that comes from the East Jerusalem. These photos are from both Israeli and Palestinian team. Everything changed when we managed to bring them together. This was the first time that both sides, engineers from both sides, come and discuss in the field the project. It took us 4 years to take this decision. So the environmental diplomacy, taking into consideration all the political sensitivity, the ego from both sides, and just to focus on environmental challenges. And we managed to get the building finished. How much time do I have?
7 minutes.
Okay. Another project that we do in the West Bank, not only in Gaza, is also with the treating the wastewater. Most of the villages in the West Bank are not connected to the sewage network. Houses, they have septic tanks. Most of them are not very well insulated. They store the wastewater there. It infiltrates into the aquifer, which is shared between Israel and Palestine. We developed the technology called the Lunatic. It's an off-grid wastewater treatment system that treats the the wastewater. This system is modular, operated as on solar energy and batteries, can be connected to a home, to school, to a village. So it's scalable, it's modular. And the cycle water is of very high quality that can be used for agriculture. So it solves an environmental challenge, generates water, and this water is used for farming in the West Bank. And the innovation here is that the system doesn't generate any sludge. In wastewater treatment plants, you have the recycled water and you have sludge, which is a solid product. But this system degrades all the organic content in the wastewater and just produces recycled water, high quality, good for agricultural purposes. We managed to install this in the Negev, in the Negev Desert of Israel, in two locations in the West Bank, in the Jordan Valley, and in the northern parts of the West Bank. And we as Israelis can go and install these systems in the Palestinian villages. When I say we, not only the Palestinian staff at the Arabic Institute, but the Israeli Jewish staff go to the West Bank, the villages in the West Bank, and install these projects. When we go to install, our team is very welcomed by the Palestinians, regardless of tension, regardless of war. One of the systems we installed in the northern West Bank in Nablus, it was during the same week that like almost 1,000 Palestinians were killed and similar Israeli soldiers were killed in Nablus. During the same week, our team was in Nablus installing this technology welcomed by the community. Again, to install is not a success, but the trust that we managed to grow our Palestinian partners, they welcome us to install such systems, that is a success. And we all do all of this as a bottom-up approach by bringing people together and just to speak one language, which is climate change, environment, to help people how to adapt and begin to climate change. Several technologies also offer desalination. Most of the aquifers in the desert, not only in this region, but also around the world. It's a saline aquifer. And we designed a system that uses solar energy, desalinate the water, and that provides farmers with high quality water, and that helps them to diversify the agricultural crops. High quality water, more crops, more products, more income for the communities. We work also with international organizations, that is one of the examples, is with Oxford University, Oxford Mountain School, in developing a model for the natural resources in this region. How these natural resources will look like in 2030 and 2050 under two scenarios. One as business as usual, if there's no cooperation between the countries, and the other one is what will happen if countries work with each other, and what is the economical value of this. Work with the Israeli University, work also with the Jewish National Fund and the Science Center, developing what we call the dual use of land, agri-photovoltaics. A land usually for agriculture, and we use the land for electricity production. And this project is actually combining both of them together to have agricultural activity involve the solar fields. And we built the first pilot in Israel. And this technology, the agrivoltaic or the dual use plan, helps us water demand reduction because the shade of the photovoltaic panels, and then plenty of sun in this region, so the amount of shade doesn't impact the agricultural activity. Increased biomass production. Some plantations get under stress, so they don't receive enough sun, and they produce larger leaves. And the goal is to have just some leaves. This is also an added value. Increased solar panels efficiency because the evaporation and the plantation creates microclimate, and that reduces the temperature of photovoltaic panels and increases the electricity production. These are photos from the first pilot. We tested several crops to see the impact of agriculture on PV panels, the impact of shading on the performance of the agriculture. We almost did not see any difference in the crops. This technology can be for modern agriculture, but also for rural areas around the world, where the electricity can be used again for desalination or for post-harvest techniques for refrigeration or cooling technologies. Again, it was really great pleasure to be with you here and to share some of the work that we do at the Auditorium Institute, and I look forward to seeing some of you in the trip tomorrow to the Auditorium Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great. And right on comment too. And so it's now my pleasure to welcome Gurion Coronado, who is going to speak on environmental and social justice initiatives of climate change across borders.
I'm so happy to be among so many friends. I love this organization. I presented my first graduate student paper, I want to say in 1988 at an ABS conference. I don't remember where. So I've been a part of this organization for many, many years. And it's been a wonderful, terrific group of people to get to know, and I'm very happy that we're able to meet together. Before I begin my comments, I want to thank David again and his team for organizing this, the staff, the hospitality, the generosity. It's been wonderful, and I want all of us to thank David and his team for this wonderful. Local officials, the Council General, thank you. This is very important. I think policymakers need to be also included in our discussions. And hopefully they'll be able to use our research to improve things as we move along. Before I begin, I need to recruit students. I'm the director of the School of Transporter Studies at Arizona State University, and we have a BA, an MA, and a PhD, and it is a unique program in the United States that focuses on borders. So please, we welcome you. Please send us your students. And I'm very happy that I'm very privileged to be able to head up this institution. So next slide, please. So part of what I'm going to be talking about today is the environmental and social justice dimensions of climate change across borders. And there's two sort of theories that or ideas that I'm working with. One of them, of course, is David Held, who argued that we have outgrown our national boundaries through increasing globalization, and we now live in overlapping communities of fate from where we should form a cosmopolitan democracy at a global level. And then the other question is 3 billion people are expected to be displaced by the effects of global warming by the end of the century. Should it lead to a shift in the way we think about national borders, asked Gaia Vince. So let me switch very quickly to events on the U.S.-Mexico border and how we have a migrant crisis, and politicians on the border have taken drastic measures to deal with the arrival of asylum seekers and migrants. Governor Abbott of Texas and former Governor Ducey of Arizona have lured migrants onto migrant buses and taken them to New York and to Washington, D.C. Florida Governor DeSantis is more generous. He charters planes and sends them to mostly cities where Democrats live. Activists and legal scholars, of course, have questioned the constitutionality of such action, so the governments continue this policy. Some migrants do report positive outcomes of these trips because it saves them money and gets them closer to where their families are. So no, the governor, that was not the original intent of the governor, because it's had a positive outcome. This January, at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Mayor of San Antonio, Ron Nierenberg, announced the Charter for Compassion. Several cities are promoting a Center for Compassionate and Equitable Cities. The city of El Paso, Texas, has also provided shelter so migrants can stay warm during the cold winters. And the mayor of San Antonio stated that it is a choice between migrants sleeping in the terminal at the San Antonio airport or bus station and being dropped outside of the downtown area at all hours of the day and night. Or the city stepping in and facilitating the migrants journey with the help of nonprofits and the faith community, he would do it again. It is basically calling for cities to become more compassionate and to organize and minimize disruption and to mitigate human suffering. The U.S. government documented 2.38 million border encounters in fiscal year 2022. Note that the government does not use the term person, migrant, or refugee, rather an encounter. An encounter is an event. And what is an encounter? It occurs when the U.S. government processes a migrant who has attempted to cross into the U.S. without authorization at or between an official port of entry. An encounter is counted if a person is apprehended while attempting to evade detection, and if a person deliberately turns themselves into U.S. authority to pursue humanitarian protection at or between ports of entry. At this point, there's two outcomes. One, the person is allowed to stay to pursue humanitarian protection, or the person can be expelled under Article 42, which is a public health measure that they implemented during COVID. And basically, you are told, because of Article 42, you cannot come into the United States. So one of the things that we have learned is that Article 42 has increased the number of attempts that the same person uses to try to enter the United States, because you might get lucky and a border official might let you through. So that is why we have these, millions and millions of attempts, but don't think that there are millions and millions of people. It's just events. One of the things that's very important is that asylum is a legal right in the United States. Those who fear persecution are legally entitled to seek protection in the United States. And to be granted asylum, you have to prove that you are suffering from persecution or that you fear facing persecution when you return to your country. The operative term here is you have to have both feet on U.S. soil to request asylum. And what Article 42 is doing, and what some of the immigration officials are doing, is not allowing people to enter the United States and ask for asylum. So some people argue that this is a violation of human rights. So indeed, many people are arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border, mostly from Venezuela, from Cuba, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. It's important to note that many of them are being not allowed to come into the United States. Many of them are evading U.S. authority. For example, people from Venezuela cannot be deported because the United States does not have a diplomatic relationship with Venezuela. And so we know the United States could do a lot, because obviously people are fleeing authoritarian regimes like Cuba and Venezuela, and the U.S. could definitely change that. So why are people fleeing their homes? And the reasons that we know why people are leaving, there are many variables, and climate change is one of them. So in part of my current research, I'm working with my colleague and friend Héctor Padilla from the Universidad Auditorium de Ciudad Juárez. And what we're doing is we are interviewing people who had every intention of leaving their country of origin, coming to the United States, seeking asylum and pursuing the American dream. And what we're interviewing people who now have said, the American dream is no more. I am staying in Mexico and I'm pursuing the Mexican dream. And so we're trying to find out how immigrant integration policies and practices are working in Mexico. Many of them have become naturalized Mexican citizens. Many of them are working. Many of them have families. And basically, we're trying to understand that process of immigrant integration in Mexico. It's a new phenomenon for Mexico, because Mexico is not known as a country of immigrants. So it's kind of a relationship between physical quantities with the health of dimensions and units of measurements required to attempt to do this. Don't ask me much more. We're working on this. A student in engineering put me on to this idea of using this dimensional analysis, and Hector and I are still there trying to figure this out. So based on preliminary work, we know that some of the drivers of migration are family reunification. I am leaving Guatemala, I am leaving Honduras because I have a parent, I have a brother, I have a husband, I have a wife, I have children, and I want to be with them. That is why I'm leaving. That's one variable. Another one is fear. El miedo, which is the Spanish word for fear, is the most common response we hear from people. Why did you leave Honduras? Why did you leave Guatemala? Why did you leave El Salvador? El miedo. They fear the police, they fear the gangs, they fear the drug traffickers, and they're just basically fear is what's driving them to leave. Violence is another, Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador are very violent countries, and the deaths per 100,000 a year in some of these countries is the highest in the world, and that's why people leave. Also poverty, and I'll give you some data on the poverty that drives this migration, food insecurity, political repression, and of course, climate change. So I think it's very important to note that migration from Central America, you just can't look at it like today or what happened yesterday or last month. You have to look at the whole history from imperialism and colonialism. Prior to the arrival of the Spaniards into what is now Latin America or Central America, indigenous people had a very good way of growing their food using slash and burn agriculture and using, corn, seeds, and squash as a basic staple. And the combination of these three sisters, is what they're known in the literature as, is basically, it allows for the corn to provide a structure for the beans to climb. The squash is spread over the ground as a living mulch to help retain moisture in the soil and prevent weeds. And basically this agricultural practice leads to replenishing the soil with nitrogen, and the beans, of course, serve as a source of protein. And then you lay the land fallow for 7 years, it takes care of itself, and then with more people and more demographic pressure, they were not allowed the land to lay fallow, and so a lot of this started to deplete the soil in Latin America. Spanish colonialism imposed an extractive economy and the development of infrastructure that was oriented to the ports to reach the ships to go to Spain. So that begins because, Central America was a producer of these three products, corn, seeds, and squash, and now they're importers of corn, beans, and squash, which is not a good thing. So fast forward, so the Spaniards did some damage, and then the United States has also done some damage, and that I don't want to go too much into that, but clearly, in 1954 in Guatemala, the United States orchestrated a coup against a leftist government who basically wanted land reform, who wanted socialized medicine, people's education, all the good things that we all want. And the United States said, no, we can't do that because we need to protect private industries, promote neoliberal economic measures that have led to poverty, unemployment, and instability. Also in 1979, you had the U.S. government involved in Nicaragua, which is another form of promoting instability and repression in the area. And so it's basically been a challenge that Central Americans have. Raul Brevich, who is a leading intellectual author, or was a leading intellectual author of the theory of trade relations, known as the unequal exchange, is very relevant today. His theory has undergone various modifications by scholars such as Vivi Emanuel, Andre Lunder Frank, Ilan Wallerstein, Joanne Bolton, and Samir Amin. They're basically, how can a country export items that are relatively inexpensive in the world market and import products that are unable to produce? So for example, how many bananas does Guatemala have to sell to be able to buy computers and cars? And basically, the three countries that I'm going to focus on today, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, are basically growing food for export: coffee, bananas, pineapple, and importing what they're eating. And so it's something that we really need to address. And I have some slides here. I don't want to focus too much on this, but this is just the exports to Guatemala. And again, number one, the U.S. is selling corn to Guatemala. That is, defies all kinds of logic. We can skip some of these because this is just the data that I just wanted to show you. U.S. export to El Salvador: corn, soymeal, wheat, and prepared food. And from El Salvador, we get t-shirts, electric capacitors, and raw sugar. Okay, adding to Raúl Gredish's theory of trade relations, there's now this unequal exchange has been expanded to include ecological unequal exchange, taking into account 4 biophysical resources: raw materials embodied in traded goods and services, energy used along the whole supply chain to produce goods, transporting coffee, bananas, berries from point A to point B, the land use required for the production of the good and labor. And ecological unequal exchange takes into account land degradation, water use, degradation of soil as well. So this is something that I think is very important in helping us to understand climate change. The 3 countries that I'm focusing on, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, are in what is called the dry corridor. And this dry corridor is basically, there has been a drought that has been affecting this area for many, many years. And clearly, this problem is manifesting itself now in this migration. In 2017, an interagency study released found a correlation between the prolonged droughts in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, exacerbated by the El Niño phenomenon from 2014 to 2016, and the increase in regular migration from these countries to the United States. The same study indicates that the trend of younger and more vulnerable people are leaving food insecure areas because they just don't have anything to eat. The family members that are left behind face the burden of paying the debts of those who have migrated. If the migration is unsuccessful, the family faces the problem of growing debt and how to meet their food needs. The study also pointed out that 47% of the families were food insecure, and that 72% of the families were applying emergency coping strategies, such as selling their lands and the farm animals and leaving to urban centers. Many of these families relied on the remittances that their family members sent back if they had a successful migratory pattern. And in 2014, the World Food Program noted that extreme weather led to a bad harvest in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. According to the World Food Program, crop failures in Central American nations of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua were basically due to the drought. And right now, there's 1.4 million people urgently in need of food assistance in this process. Another report published by the Duke Center for International Development noted that migration to the United States from Guatemala has increased. Almost half of the people in Guatemala live in poverty, and the poverty rate rises to 80% for indigenous people who make up more than 40% of the country's population. Guatemala has the highest levels of childhood stunting in Latin America and is the 6th highest in the world, with rates in rural and indigenous communities more than 50% higher than national averages. Frequent droughts linked to climate change in the dry corridor have significantly affected the agricultural sector, which employs 1/3 of Guatemalan workers. 30% of the households of migrants in the affected areas, the dry corridor, cite climate-induced lack of food as the main reasons for leaving their home and becoming migrants. An internal report from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency found that the overwhelming factor behind the recent migration from Guatemala was the crop shortage that left citizens impoverished and starving. In 2019, Honduras declared a state of emergency due to the drought. The southern section of the country reported 72% of the corn and 75% of the beans being lost, according to the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. So not only is the dry corridors a problem, but then flooding and hurricanes, cyclones have also affected Central America. So on the one hand, you have drought, and then when it does rain, then you have massive flooding. Part of this, this whole, tropical cyclones is something that people rely on in Latin America for water to use for improve their crops. And again, sometimes the water now or the cyclones don't come. If they come, they're too violent. It causes a lot of disruption, and they have also received, intense rainfall that has led to many damaging floods. Central America is getting hotter and drier, but it's also experiencing heavy floods. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the most authoritative and heavily peer-reviewed climate change report ever done, and Central America has been identified as an area of major concern. But let's go to the next one, so I can. So let's go back to, here's the data from the US government. And basically what the Duke report is saying is that the annual apprehensions of people from Guatemala arriving into the United States has increased from 340 in 2012 to 185,000 in 2019. But what's interesting is that it's not just individuals migrating, it's family units. So the blue is individuals and the other dotted line are families. And so there's been an increase in family migration, which is a new development to this area. The Customs and Border Protection data that the Duke report cites note that rural poverty and agricultural stress linked to climate change are drivers of migration from rural to urban areas and subsequently leads to migration in the United States. In this slide, you can see that the three departments with the highest numbers of apprehensions are people from Huehuetenango, Quiche, and San Marcos. They're all located in the Western Highlands, and the rural population in these departments ranges between 68 and 70% of the total department population. 7% of the population of Huehuetenango was apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico at the southern border as part of a family unit during this time, the highest percent of any department. So in a nutshell, what this report is saying is that the higher the share of rural populations in the department is associated with more family migration. And basically, the Duke report indicates that the areas of the dry corridor have a lot of rural poverty and agricultural stress and is leading to migration. So you have colonialism, imperialism, environmental factors, the dry corridor, climate change, drought, rain, or flooding, and then you have these new actors that have come into the picture, and these are drug traffickers and gang members. So the high levels of violence in some Guatemalan cities is basically some of the highest in the world. You have drug trafficking organizations and gangs and increasing rates of extortion that also lead to rural and urban migration. Drug traffickers and gang members are terrorizing people in the region, and there is evidence that drug trafficking also leads to environmental damage. A geographer from Ohio State, using data from the University of Maryland's Global Forest Change website, matches deforestation to increases in drug trafficking, and in the end, she found the three countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, having a major problem. Money laundering is taking place by investing in cattle ranching in the region, and basically what they're doing is clearing the land so that they can then have their cows grow food to feed the cows and using, basically tearing down the forest. And so this is something that has been documented by the study and also in environmental research letters. An article suggested that cocaine trafficking accounts for between 15 and 30% of annual forest loss in the three countries over the past decade. The other actor, of course, is a gang called the Mara Salvatrucha, which is known as MS-13. And basically, this gang was created in the United States in the streets of Los Angeles. And when the Obama administration came into power, they started to deport a lot of people. As you know, the Obama administration was known as the deporter-in-chief. And the MS-13 basically took their gang activities into El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and they are quite a large-scale operation. Their annual revenue from extortions, from kidnappings, from all of these bad things is basically about 31.2 million a year. So not only do you have, all these other variables, but then you have these gangs. Of course, the pandemic affected all of these countries, like it affected all of us, but of course, these countries, of course, had a lot more to deal with. The positive outcome of the COVID pandemic is that there was an increase in remittances to the three countries. And that was, even Mexico had an increase in remittances from workers abroad. And so you have the remittances, there's the data that you have. And clearly, the pandemic had an effect, and basically most of the people were listed as essential workers. Many of them are farm workers, many of them work in very dangerous and demanding jobs. Now, I'm going to switch focus here, and I'm going to talk about 2 minutes. The U.S. needs workers, and so there's this push-pull force of migration that Jorge Bustamante talked about many, many years ago. And basically, at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, just this January, Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh said, we need immigration reform in America. America has always been a country that is dependent on immigration. Right now, we don't have a good immigration policy. There are jobs available right now in the United States that we don't have enough people for. The threat to the American economy long-term is not inflation, it's about immigration. It's not having enough workers. So on the one hand, you don't want immigration. On the other hand, you have the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Labor saying we need people to come here to work. So it's something that the U.S. is also a part of this whole thing. And these are some of the dirty, dangerous, and demanding jobs that migrants do. A lot of them work in agricultural production, in the dairy farms in Wisconsin. And something that, the U.S. has acknowledged. Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, issued a policy this same January acknowledging the following: unscrupulous employers who prey on the vulnerability of non-citizen workers, harm all workers, and disadvantage businesses who play by the rules. We will hold these predatory actors accountable by encouraging all workers to assert their rights, report violations they have suffered or observed, and cooperate in labor standards investigations. Through these efforts with our labor agency partners, we will protect the American labor market, the conditions of the American worksite, and the dignity of the workers who power our economy. And so in the past, immigrant workers were not reported abuses because they were afraid of getting deported, and Mayorkas is now saying, please report your employers who are exploiting you. So the U.S. has a lot to say about what's going on. I want to close with this. In the United States, we have a long, complicated asylum process, but it's not effective. And you will see here, people from Guatemala are denied asylum very often. Only 14% of people who applied for asylum were granted asylum from Guatemala, 18% from El Salvador, and 12% from Honduras. And so even if you apply for asylum, the opportunity to get it is very, very limited. So I hope that I was able to, I'm done. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope I was able to convey climate change is a variable. There are other variables. The U.S. is complicit in all of this. Thank you.
I ran out of time. That was lovely. That was wonderful. Two wonderful presentations. Different, but I think both very much on target for raising, the spectrum of issues that we can look at from the point of view of what climate change, what the impact of climate change may be, is, and maybe continuing. So I'd like to invite both of our speakers to the table. And we are going to be able to take, I'll just keep and I'm really mindful, has told us we have to be ready for lunch at 10 to 1. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions for the next couple of minutes. So yes, I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's name, but I'll just point and.
Thank you. Those were both excellent presentations, and I commend you both. Tarek, I have a question concerning the environmental diplomacy, the marvelous work that the Arava Institute has been doing. Do you monitor, have you seen spread effects in terms of growing the sustainability impact and also the peace dividend? And I don't mean necessarily between the states, but the polity, on a people-to-people basis.
Okay, we see the impact very, very clearly. In the past, we used to chase our partners for cooperation, and today, partners from Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, come to us, to the Arava Institute, and say, we have this environmental challenge. Let's design a solution together, and let's implement the solution together. So we see that the impact of the work is spreading between partners. After the Alberia success, we've been approached by municipalities in the West Bank, in the northern parts of the West Bank, saying we have the same challenge as Alberia for wastewater. Can you help us get permission from the Israeli authorities to build trunk lines? We see also a higher numbers of students who are interested in joining the program at the Arava Institute. So we see the impact. We see a positive result. It's challenging. It's not easy. We need brave people to stand and say it all openly. But I believe that no one of us has the privilege to give up on these things. I do this because it's not only for peace. I do it because it's good for the region. It's good for my people.
Let's have a question for Sima right now, and then we'll alternate back and forth. I may, in fact, collect a few questions up at once if needed, but have we got a question for Sima?
I have a question for Tarek, but I can listen to.
Okay, well, let's just open it up then. Oh, yes, okay.
Thank you very much to both presenters for great presentation. The question to Dr. Abu Hamed, I was wondering, how do you navigate the restrictions that are imposed by Israel in the West Bank in the context of the occupation? Some of the most vulnerable communities are Bedouins who are living in Area C at risk of forcible transfer, where Israel doesn't allow to implement water and sanitation projects that are most needed in those areas. So what kind of strategies do you have and dilemmas with facing with this very, very serious humanitarian need?
Wow, it took us 30 years to do this work and to engage, the politics and the way in implementing projects. We worked directly with the civil administration, which is the governmental arm that is in charge of the West Bank. We convinced each of that this project or this activity is good for that side, for the Israelis. And we convinced the Palestinians also the same. It's not always easy. We don't always get the permissions that we apply for 30 students from the West Bank to come, and we get permission for 15 or even 10. It's hard, and the renewal change of the government itself also impacts us significantly. Being accused as normalizers, as Austin also is a challenge. The BDS movement is also a challenge, not only the local authorities. It's very hard. We don't implement, we don't bring sometimes researchers that are interested in research with the result as well because of the lack of traditions.
Just a question, where does the funding come from for the wastewater treatment plants?
For the wastewater, okay, our funding usually comes from donations, foundations, and as another research organization also apply for research funding. What I showed you is only the applied and community work that we do, but we do a lot also of pure scientific research, basic research. 2/3 of our budget comes from international donors, and 1/3 just from Israel. And it's getting very, very hard to get these funds.
To Dr. Tarek, how scalable are your solutions? You mentioned 5 or 2 instances. Can you get to 200, to 2,000, to 20,000? Is that something that you're considering and looking into something like that?
Indeed, this is the sustainability and the scalability of the projects that are very important to us. When we implement a project in Morocco or maybe in Gaza, we don't just send the system that we developed to Gaza. We bring engineers and technicians from Gaza to Israel for trainings. Several weeks, they learn the technologies, they learn how to design, implement, maintain, run these systems, and they go and do the work back in their communities. The wastewater project is scalable, as I said. Now we have a very large school in the northwest end that is connected to this. We are now sending these systems also into Jordan, and hopefully we'll send these systems also to Turkey with the earthquake happen.
I'm take the chair prerogative for a second though to ask a question. I think perhaps you said it quite teased out a bit, and it's a question that a lot of people often wonder about. What is the relationship when all the border infrastructure that's there to process chronic refugees at this point and refugees of environmental insecurity? Where are the major points? I mean, the Caribbean, I know the Caribbean used to be a big Miami, and now we're seeing these, the continuing elements of land roads. What's the relationship between those who cross, in a documented way and undocumented way, and what are the major areas in which you're seeing mobility and movement?
Yeah, the cities where you see most migrants are Juarez, Ciudad del Paso, a lot of them in Brownsville, Matamoros, not so much Tijuana because it's farther and longer to get there, but there are some. Nogales has a few, not that many, but I would say that El Paso to Juarez right now is the hotbed of this activity.
Yeah. Yes.
For Dr. Iracema, one of the variables is exactly the food insecurity and all that. In looking at that, and I don't know if you have gotten there yet, but in looking at the expulsion in terms of variable and the lack or the current immigration policies of the United States, do you see anytime soon any diminishing of migration from the Northern Triangle or an increase of that? It's a guess, I suppose.
Well, the U.S. needs workers, and there are people in the construction industry, in the dairy industry, in the home healthcare industry, in the childcare industry that are trying to find a mechanism to get people to get work permits because they need them. Right. And so I think that in the United States, if corporations and businesses push for some sort of reform, it would be better. The migrants that we have met tell us they want circulation. They want to come, they want to work, they want to raise money, they want to go back home. They want to maintain that circularity of migration. They don't really care to stay in the United States forever. But now, because the circulation is so difficult and they can't come back easily, they're staying. There are people in the United States that are captive. They cannot leave. I mean, there's a community in New Mexico called Salem. Josiah Hyman has written about this. These are people that if they go south to Las Cruces, and you know this, there's a Border Patrol checkpoint on the way back. If they go north to Albuquerque, there's another Border Patrol checkpoint. So what do? They stay in that little town. The only thing they do is go to work and come back. Schools have noticed that some parents will not go pick up their children. They have to have the neighbor pick up the child because they're afraid of getting picked up by the Border Patrol. That's not a way to live. And so I think we need to do something about it. I mean, everyone was hopeful that the Biden administration would come and make wholesale change, and they haven't. So it's a very complicated political issue, but I'm hoping that the business sector at least pushes for work permits, for work visas, so that people can come, stay temporarily, and go back, which is something that they decided.
Thank you. Let's pick up a couple of questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, so let's take a few questions and then we'll put them to both our panelists.
Everyone's tired, but I have a question for Tadek.
Okay, you're allowed.
So in Texas, we have a problem that I've been studying for many years, and these are colonias, unplanned housing settlements for poor people, and they don't have water, they don't have sewer, they don't have infrastructure. This kind of technology, based on what you shared, I think would be ideal in solving some of the problems in colonias. Have you considered exporting this to other parts of the world? I know you said about Turkey and the distressed areas, so this would be something that in South Texas would be very well received. Of course, if it's affordable.
It's affordable, and the answer is yes. We can send these machines to the whole machine. The better is that we can also just kind of buy them from the local market and run these systems.
Back, you have the microphone. There must be at least, I know there are a couple of people that have hands up and didn't get. Yeah, yes, I thought your hand was up. No? Okay. Anyone? Do you want this microphone? You have a quiet voice.
I just have a small question. Is what do the students do? Because you talk to us about students. How do you train them to do this kind of self-diplomacy, or do you train them? What do you think?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And actually, the most important product of the Urban Institute is not the project, it's the alumni of the Urban Institute. You can imagine when you put in the same classroom the Palestinian from Gaza or from the refugee camp in the West End with a zero student with a 70,000. And you tell them study the environment, take the course. You have to talk about the conflicts. We have a dialogue forum for them where they discuss everything. They talk about politics, they talk about independence, they talk about Nakba, they talk about culture, they talk about religion, share family stories, personal stories. They have the kind of understanding of the lives, understanding of the other. They totally disagree with each other, but they understand each other and they build a community. In all, we have almost like 2,009 in this region. Most of them stay in the environmental field. They become teachers, they become professors, and one person becomes an ambassador of the peace environment in the environmental institute.
Going once, going twice. Oh, but not done.
Yes, Ms. Lima, I have a question. Is there any recognition in the United States that the quote migrant crisis is largely a function of historical processes that and ongoing processes affecting development in the countries of origin, now development, and there's responsibility. Much of the export of these crops, whether it's coffee or bananas or beef, is to America facilitated. Is there any recognition of such responsibility?
A little bit, but we're not there yet. People are just too narrow. They just think too many people are coming, they're taking away resources, and it's just, they don't look at this holistically. There has been a push for foreign assistance. Mexico has pushed to address the root cause of this migration, but it's not gained as much traction as it should.
Well, I want to thank you and thank you for your questions. I want to thank the panelists today. I think we've had a wonderful plenary session. We always, whenever we start with science, we always end up talking about it. Thank you very much.
To make here maps and the other, each one take one map. And you will use it for the presentation and keep the map with you.
And we're the ones to have some lectures about tomorrow's field trip at 1:30. Welcome.
And then at one point you get there is work in there, so you go towards the water, if I'm wrong, you walk 40 more meters, and there are steps to the beach. Yes. And I just I noticed it today. But I don't know how.
Thanks for being with us today. Can you hear me? No? Yeah, can you hear me now? I just want to say.
Yes, can now.
Hello, everybody. I would like to warm welcome our speakers, but also our audience. Thank you very much for joining this session. And a special and particular welcome to Ted, who is connected online. So it's difficult to address someone who is far away through the cyberspace, but it's very nice that technology makes this possible. Well, my name is Martin Guillermo. I will moderate, chair this session. I'm the Secretary General of the Association of European Border Regions. So actually, I'm not at all a specialist on Asia, but I'm always very much eager to know more about cross-border cooperation because our experiences has been that we learned a lot. We Europeans, we thought that we were the only ones doing cooperation across boundaries, but we learned some time ago that this is not the case. So I'm really looking forward to listen to you, to see how many things we have in common. and also what are the specificities and to understand better, because I think learning and understanding better the situation across boundaries in other continents could make our work even better. So very, very eager to listen. We will have until.
Just saying, the viewing angle of the camera is from the end till the podium.
From the end of the table to the podium. So here they cannot see. No. Okay, perfect. But here I am. Thank you. Well, then we will pass the floor to the first speaker very soon. But I would like anyway to remind that this is a big panel. This is a panel. Of course, we are in the conference of the Association of Borderland Studies, but there are some panels that have been organized in the framework of the big project, Borders in Globalization. Then I would like to remind, I think you all know very well the speakers, to remind that there are two major elements in this series of panels. One of them is the reference to what we call indigenous issues, the persons, communities, nationhoods who are living across the border. So how the internal state borders established by the Western style administration is challenged or is challenged by the nationhood issues. And the second element is how states are implementing bordering processes, if there are new and innovative procedures to control, and even to the international challenges which are growing, especially in this process of globalization, deglobalization, or wherever we are right now. So please, I will kindly ask you to refer to these elements because it's important for us to keep the logic of the big project. So thank you very much again for being here. We have all our audience, the doors are closed, so we will start by giving the floor. Please forgive me if I don't pronounce appropriately the names. Danijai,
Yes.
Tripathi,
Yeah.
She's coming from the South Asian University in Delhi, and you have the floor.
Thank you.
You want to use the podium or?
Yeah, I can use the podium.
Okay. I think you have this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Before I start, my sincere thanks to Big and Emmanuel. For supporting border studies in South Asia. As the chair has already pointed out, that it's a big panel. So the panel is possible because of the big help. It's a part of, and we are, as a part of South Asian University, we're also part of the big program, big project. And this is a paper that is, I'm working on this paper is how we are studying border studies in South Asia. And what I have perspective come from the Department of International Relations. So, borders in South Asia, I wrote a paper in 2016 that how borders are viewed differently in different regions. And I'm sure all of you must agree on the point that this is one of the reasons that we still don't have a border theory, because we don't agree on how to really theorize border. But at the same time, we have a concept of border. I think that's so true for all of us. And what is this concept of border? We believe that border is about division. It's about somewhat like creating a limit for yourself. So you can see borders everywhere, in a personal life, in professional life, and in a way we also define border as order. Without border, there will be a lot of disorder or anarchy. I'm drawing a lot from international relations. Even one of the very prominent liberal scholars like J.S. Mill, he also believed that you are free, but not to a point where you start infringing on the limits of others. So there has to be a border, even from a very liberal perspective. So
in a political terms, water, as we understand, is like essential part of this international system because of peace. It brings peace. But the story of waters are not very old. It started from 1648 from the Treaty of Westphalia. And if I can go a little earlier, the Cardinal Richelieu of France, who started emphasizing on his state, his shadow. He's the one who wanted to bring order in the whole of Europe. And this is how we started creating borders. Although there are scholars who are not really comfortable with this kind of borders, like Bertocci, and who calls it the myth of 1648. He believes that it is being artificially imposed on people. And balance of power is nothing but a way to establish your empires, is a way to create a further politics and divisions. So there are scholars like that, but there are also scholars like Benedict Anderson, who believe that, well, you create political borders, but also through imagination you create, idea of a state, idea of borders. Anyway, it's a difficult, as an idea scholar, it's difficult for me to challenge the notion of nation state, both in a theoretical and in a practical terms, because we are in a very interesting time where we can see geopolitics everywhere. It's a bit of geopolitics, even in a region like Europe, and I'm referring to Russia-Ukraine crisis, the war. So it's very difficult to say that nation states are farce or artificial, at least in the time that we are in. So that is why there is no water theory and per se, because the states also have their different imaginations of water, different ideas of water. To the US, for them the Mexico border is different, US-Mexico border is different. But at the same time, for the US-Canada border is different. There are two ideas of waters for one state. In South Asia also, if you look at South Asia, I'm coming to the South Asia part. This is South Asia, which is more than 1.5 billion people, second largest economy in terms of per PPP, purchasing power parity, that is India. These are shared cultural and historical linkages. But it's one of the least integrated regions of the world. Intra-regional trade is less than 5%. And there are a lot of people who like to define South Asia as a region of hope and despair. So, what the hope is our cultural linkages. But what is the problem? The problem is our political contestations. So, interestingly, water in South Asia has been created by, not by the South Asians, it was created by the British. And what I call as imperial anxiety has led to the creation of water. So that is why there are fascinating names of waters in South Asia. Duner line, Mohan line, Redcliffe line. We have created different lines in South Asia, and because of imperial anxiety, there was no water between India and Nepal. It was created by Treaty of Savali, and that was British war. But when the British withdrew from the region, what we have done, we have really acquired that anxiety. And a little bit of these things have played out in our memories when we started building our independent nation states. So the partition, and these are a couple of pictures. The picture number one is the partition of India-Pakistan. The picture number two is 1971, when East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So this type of anxiety, and if you look at Bangladesh, there were actually three partitions. 1905, 1947, then 1971. So we have developed our idea of regions through not only post-colonial lenses, but also post-partition lens. And I would like to flag here one of the special issues that was also supported by the BIG that I and Professor Chaturvedi have edited. And this is one of the most downloaded articles in JBL, Journal for Borderland Studies. And I was surprised, why? And the answer to this, to me, it looks like that the theorization of South Asia as post-colonial and post-partition is the most appropriate theorization of South Asian borders, most appropriate conceptualization of South Asian borders. So that is why this article has generated a lot of interest. And look at this picture. This is a very popular ceremony, is a flag ceremony between India and Pakistan, where you can see soldiers raising their legs up to the, up to the shoulder of other countries. These are from India and Pakistani sides. So this is how we look at border, like entire show of masculinity, show of power. And also this anxiety comes from a number of other factors in South Asia. I'm talking in Israel, and if we can say that, who understand better these kind of anxieties like the cross-border terrorism. And that is why this is the second picture, which is a picture of India-Bangladesh border. It's the fifth largest land border in the world. It is fenced. And India-Bangladesh, again, we have same language, same food, but we again are divided by these fences. So what are borders in South Asia? How we have developed this kind of anxiety? Because of war. We have 3 wars between India and Pakistan. There are 2 nuclear powers in this region. We have war in India and China in 1962. There's cross-border terrorism. And let us not forget the fact that the epicenter of international terrorism, Afghanistan, was also and is also a South Asian country. So, all of this will make us very, very anxious. We are frightened, and that is why we want our border to be secure. From South Lion to Pakistan, there are many other factors. As I said, it's not merely the partition, but many other things. So, what is borders in South Asia? I would say borders in South Asia is about othering. And it's a continuous process. And thanks to Professor Chaturvedi yesterday in his presentation, we have made this point. And this is a continuous othering in South Asia. And this othering takes place through different mediums. It's not like through political, it's takes place through textbooks. And this is an excellent book by a Pakistani scholar who called it a mother of history in Pakistan. Because India-Pakistan history can't be 2 different histories. There has to be one history. But interestingly, in Pakistan, they teach a different kind of history. And in India, we teach a different kinds of history. Yesterday, Vaishali Raghuvanshi has presented a paper where she underlined how movies are a medium to create this kind of othering between India and Pakistan. And our newsrooms, also is a way to create this kind of othering. So, bordering in South Asia is still not over. It's a continuous process. So, how to study borders in South Asia? I think one of the lenses is cartographic anxiety. That's one way of studying South Asian border. The other way, if you ask other South Asian countries, they like to read borders from a perspective of Indian hegemony. They call India as a hegemon and imposing a lot of things on them. So that's another lens by which we can study South Asian border. Then there is a security dilemma. And that security dilemma is antithetical to the idea of integration and connectivity. Despite our shared cultural past and history, we are still not integrated. So the other way of studying borders in South Asia is like a self-help system, nuclear powers. So you maximize your power and then you overcome your border anxiety, your security anxiety. So this is how, these are some of the things that we study South Asian border. So because of these factors, it's a realist theory in IR, which believe that there's a complete anarchy in the international system that is preferred by many South Asian scholars when they read borders. Also, from the security study lenses, people try to read borders. People like scholars like Professor Chaturvedi are arguing in the terms of climate refugees can also be a very important theme to study borders, but not much takers, as I said, that there are security anxiety. The cross-border trade a number of people also talk in terms of cross-border trade. But again, you don't find many scholars working on this. Again, the border management and border security is a point, but for us, border management is about border security. It is not about facilitating trade. And borderland, unfortunately, is not at all under discussion in South Asian border studies. The another very important factor is changing the study of borders in South Asia, the China factor. What yesterday is pointed out by Professor Chaturvedi is the BRI, and I agree with Professor Chaturvedi that China is actually twisting the borders and maps of the whole of the world, not only South Asia. And this is again adding to Indian security anxiety, which is known as a string of pearls. So if you look at the map, China is trying to surround India, encircle India by getting to different strategic locations. And that's again a problem of border anxiety. And from 2020 onwards, when the world was fighting COVID, India and China was at the borders, contesting each other. So that's also a kind of anxiety that has been added. So that is why we don't discuss cross-border trade, etc., in the context of South Asia. And I'm amazed. One of the things that I would like to say here, that there is no scholars from China. So how can an ABS world be completed without a discussion from China and from Chinese scholar and by the Chinese scholar? Otherwise I find that you will be guilty of the fact that when such a big change is going on in the world geopolitics, and China is responsible for a large part of this change, and this change is not limited to South Asia, it's in Africa, it's in Europe, it's in Central Asia. We cannot conclude a border studies conference until China comes into this. Until China has been discussed thoroughly and by Chinese scholars. So one of the anxieties that has been added in South Asia is the China factor. So that is why in South Asia, when we look at border studies, basic data is very realist. A number of the cultural other factors is being discarded. So what is to be done? How border studies in South Asia can really grow or go beyond the security study? And here I would like to say we have to reimagine the border studies in South Asia. So after yesterday's presentation of Professor Chaturvedi, when he highlighted about the meta-geographies, I would like to add another category to this, and that is not only geopolitics, geoeconomics, but South Asia should also be seen as geocultural region of the world. There is one category that has not been highlighted much in the context of South Asia, is geocultural. And by geocultural, I mean the pre-colonial South Asia. Because post-colonial South Asia, when we start looking at it, the security anxieties will remain there. And I don't know for how many years. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for, hello? Does it work?
We hear you.
Yeah, for the, yeah, yes. Okay, thank you very much, Danja. I think it was very interesting insight, at least from my side. And I think it's also today we have made a couple of exercises of criticism in previous sessions, and I can see this is the tonic. And I think this is very healthy. And of course, it's going to be very profitable, and probably in the future it's a little bit more successful. So thanks a lot. I think we are going to have first the presentations, then the discussion, and then we can give the floor to the public for questions. So then, without any more delay, it will be my pleasure to give the floor now to Edward Boyle, Ted Boyle, in the International Research Center for Japanese Studies in Kyoto. I think that Ted is with us. Yes, okay, yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very sorry not to be able to join you in person. I'm sort of currently shivering in Kyoto's winter and watching your beach bar events with a certain amount of jealousy, I have to say. I'm afraid the for whatever reason the sound isn't very good, so I didn't hear much of what Dhananjay just said actually. But I'll try and join the discussion later. I also bring apologies from Professor Naomi Chi, who won't be joining us in the end. She hasn't made it to the midnight Valentine's Day start time for this session in Japan. So it's just me, I'm afraid. I just want to share one image at the start here. So I think you can see that. This is just to show the title of my presentation, but it is something of a nominal title. But I also think it shows something interesting about borders in Japan, or at least I'll try and explain what that is here. So this is an image from the southernmost inhabited island of Okinawa and of Japan, Hateruma, and it's a monument showing basically the southernmost point of Japan. This panel's about Asian borders, and I've also been fortunate enough to do some work on India's borders as well with the third speaker in the panel, Mirza Ramen. And these sorts of monuments are very familiar from, for example, the India-Bangladesh border, but there they actually indicate the borderline itself. And here in Japan, we see the monuments as being situated on the islands that make up Japan's territory, but not quite on the border itself. And that slippage, I think, is quite important and quite germane for the many of the things that the Borders in Globalization project wants to look at. As I said, that's really the only slide I'm going to show. So I'm afraid the rest of this is going to be just my face looming over you. So for those of a sensitive disposition, you might want to leave now. As Emmanuel, as was mentioned, sorry, at the start, this is part of the Borders in Globalization project. And Emmanuel was very insistent that we make this a forward-looking presentation. So really what I'm going to do today is run through a few themes that might be relevant for the Borders in Globalization project. And I was hopefully looking to get some feedback from all of you there, and maybe see also in discussion with my Indian colleagues, like what we could do regarding Asia more broadly. Now, obviously, there's quite significant differences that are just highlighted between India and Japan in this regard. India's borders, certainly the most sensitive borders that Dhananjay was I think highlighting in his presentation, are continental ones. In Japan, these security tensions tend to be more out in maritime areas and related to quite marginal scraps of land, possession of quite marginal scraps of land within the region within which Japan finds itself situated. And I suppose the other big difference between India and Japan is that India, again, Dhananjay mentioned this, India sees itself as a rising power in its sort of broader region, whereas Japan has not been rising for 30 years or so, and these days is very much overshadowed by another large continental power that's a bit closer to it. And that, I think that feeds into a lot of the discussion about borders in Japan. But the focus of this panel was sort of try and get beyond security, just narrowly focusing on security. And so I'd like to do that through the two pillars that structure the Borders in Globalization project. So the first of these looks more at what's labeled as indigenous ideas of borders and nationhood, or understandings of borders and nationhood. So in Japan, there's sort of several ways that this can be, I think, would be fruitful to investigate. The most obvious one, and this was actually mentioned by Jeff Korntassel in his talk on Sunday, I think it was, relates to the Ainu, who are the indigenous population of Hokkaido, so the northern end of Japan. But from the Japanese political sort of structure within which the Ainu exist is quite different from that exists in say perhaps Canada or the United States, and so the connecting the current discussions over Ainu rights, which have been and recognition of the Ainu, which has become a sort of issue in the past 15 years, to sort of broader issues of sovereignty and so forth, is actually quite difficult. And although the Ainu are now recognized as an indigenous population of Japan for like the last 15 years, this has only been in the last 15 years. So the direct parallels with perhaps the movements centered around indigenous sovereignty happening in other parts of the world, including in India, may be a little harder to get from this. The other area in Japan, which sort of geographically distinct area of Japan where this applies, is Okinawa, which is the southernmost islands of Japan. And there, the situation relates more around the Okinawa's long-standing grievances about the hosting of American bases on the islands, and also a regional identity that feels was colonized by a Japanese empire, in sort of 1870s, 1880s, and feels that there is alternative political futures outside of membership of the Japanese nation state. I guess what's also interesting is perhaps the contrast between these two groups, in that the Ainu have now been recognized as mentioned, as an indigenous group, partly because I think the security situation around Hokkaido had improved so much in the aftermath of the Cold War, whereas the ongoing Okinawan separatism keeps going because of the continued sort of American security presence. But actually, perhaps with the rise of China, the sort of sense of the sense of opposition to that and desire for separation from Japan has like concurrently weakened, together with this increasing sense of security threat to the region. I guess the third sort of aspect of this in Pillar 1 that I thought was worth thinking about was perhaps Japan's own ideas of its borders and its national boundaries. And one thing I just wanted to flag sort of leads us into the Pillar 2 stuff, the more sort of location of national borders out in the globe rather than in the territory of the state itself, but relates to how Japan has sort of thinks about its own diaspora, I guess. As most of you will probably know, Japan has a very sort of just sanguineous idea of its Japanese nationality and belonging to the Japanese nation. But this was also accompanied earlier in the 20th century with sort of mass immigration to many parts of the world, partly as within the Japanese empire, but also more broadly to particularly to North America, South America, islands of the Pacific. And it's interesting that obviously in the post-war period, Japan territorially shrunk back to a much more restricted understanding of the Japanese islands, but its sense of Japanese as still being present in these other parts of the world continued, and this was shown sort of even in the late 1980s, 1990s, when when the demand for foreign labor first emerged. The idea was to bring back Japanese descendants, the descendants of these Japanese who'd moved to Brazil, for example, and even more pointedly in sort of the year 2000, when Alberto Fujimori had to flee Peru, Peruvian president who had to flee. He came to Japan and was warmly accepted as Japanese, and he even ran for sort of political office in Japan as a Japanese citizen, having already been president of Peru. I think at that time there was still this acceptance that Japanese blood equated to membership of Japan, but this has faded, obviously, as time has gone on, as that is attached to, say, parents or grandparents having Japanese nationality. And so this is partly a regulatory issue, but it's also an identity issue of who comes to be counted as Japan. And as the distance from this migration, from this diasporic production gets further and further, these sense of connections of Japanese in Japan with Japanese descended peoples in other parts of the world gets much thinner. And we see this thinning, yes? And so Japan's territorial shrinkage is also accompanied by this increasing isolation in some senses. The kind of results of this have been visible in Japan's own demographics. And this is where we sort of really shift into the second pillar, this regulation of the borders and how this plays out in the present. So one of the more sort of concrete ways that this has been happening in recent years is in relation to labor migration. Most of you will probably be familiar with the outlines of this, at least. So Japan has very restrictive, amongst sort of OECD countries, Japan has very restrictive rules on settlement and migration and gaining employment, but also has this large shortage of workers and a shrinking population. So there is a need to bring in overseas labor in order to plug these gaps. And the discussion over the last 20 years has been this ever expanding series of schemes, sort of classifications by which foreign laborers can be brought into the country. So that's one thing, but the second is sort of specific agreements that Japan has made with certain, mostly Southeast Asian countries, so specifically Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And what's been happening there is both the sort of outsourcing of the border to these countries, in that these partner countries are undertaking pre-screening of the applicants, but also the increasing involvement of private companies and private recruiters within this. Within these national or sort of, what would you say, intergovernmental schemes for labor migration. So you have the border both being pushed out geographically from Japan into these partner countries, but also increasingly its operation is being conducted not by state agencies, but by the private sector. And in this regard, Japan mimics, I think, the practices of many other countries on a smaller scale than what we might see perhaps in European states or in Canada and the United States. But it is part of that global pattern in which the border is pushed out from the nation's territorial boundaries. So with that said, however, the border remains quite strictly policed in Japan. So we're only just emerging from sort of COVID-induced restrictions on international travel. So the border was sort of open to tourists in October, I think, of last year. And Japan still feels quite closed. So in that respect, the COVID situation has sort of set back this process of Japan opening out to the world, but these other programs are still taking place away from Japan's shores. This regulation of potential migrants to Japan has still been taking place throughout this time, even if on a smaller scale. There's quite a few more things I want to mention, but I know I'm sort of reaching the end of my allotted time, and I think sort of opening it, getting feedback would be more useful. I just want to say a quick word about, firstly, the regional situation. This brings us back to security. So Japan's regional situation is very fraught. It has disputes with most of its neighbors. As you may know, relations of much of the world with Russia are a little bit complicated at the moment, and Japan is part of the G7 group in this respect. So while its relations with Russia amongst the G7 are probably the best, that's not saying a great deal. But it also has ongoing disputes with China and Korea. These are partly territorial, but also also related to matters of historical memory, but also just fundamentally political. So, and on Sunday, Emmanuel, when he was introducing the Borders in Globalization project, spoke about how sort of long-standing agreements between Canada and the United States, for example, were being dismantled just because the sides were unable to talk to each other about these agreements. And this is something that we also see in Japan. So Japan and South Korea from 2019 until comparatively recently, sort of the elections in South Korea have slightly changed the situation, but until comparatively recently had been on very bad terms politically. But this affected things like the fishery agreements between the two countries, which had supposedly been coming up for renewal, and these agreements lapsed because the agencies in questions were unable to talk to each other because of broader, long-standing political disagreements that are affecting the operation and regulation of borders within the region, and that's something that's very much present. I think I will probably leave it there. I think there's other things definitely to say, and I would like people's feedback. And this is partly, as I set out these issues today, I'm thinking about the sort of issues that I would like students to focus on within the Borders in Globalization project, and also how they can contribute to the project's, larger, more global goals from a specifically Japanese perspective. But I'd also appreciate sort of some words on from the Indian side and what issues have resonance between the two countries, despite the perhaps different geopolitical, but also perhaps economic circumstances that the two countries. And I think just national mood, questions of national mood or national confidence that the two states find themselves in. So with that, thank you for your attention. I can't see anyone at all, but I presume there's someone still in the room. So I'll conclude there. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I promise you that we are some guys here. They listen to you very carefully with a lot of care. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, and also for highlighting some interesting elements that we can feel. What is the feelings of the Japanese population towards the borders, some disputes, and even the history. Thanks a lot. I think we will come back to you later after listening to also to our discussion and perhaps with some questions. But now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mirza Zulfiqur Rahman at the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. Mirza, the floor is yours.
Thank you. For being here for the second day. I would like to thank the Borders in Globalization project, which has enabled this panel, and also to the organizers of this conference for especially Professor Gurion for being a very gracious host and facilitating the conference very smoothly. And we have had quite a lot of interesting conversations, discussions in the past 2 days, and looking forward to the next 2 as well. Here, my presentation today, I'm just trying to also contextualize it within the context
context of the Borders and Globalization project, as Manuel was speaking about the other day, about the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And a lot of our work in Northeast India, and I'd like to acknowledge Admiral Boyle here, where we have actually conducted quite a lot of field work in Northeast India and along the borders in Meghalaya, along the way, eating a lot of fermented bitterness along the way, you know. In a sense, terms of how we actually can bring our work to be active scaffolding, kind of in terms of scaffolding the pillars 1 and pillars 2. In terms of how indigenous resources is being talked about from within the nation, and also in terms of how the borders and connectivity work that comes from the nation state perspective. And I would like to also draw attention to what Dr. Lal was speaking about in the early panel from today, as how the nation state looks at borders and fences from a nation state perspective, and how communities living along those borders from their context of the borderlands, and what are the meanings and the plural context that people bring to borders that actually make them borderlands. And that is what I think essentially Pillar 1 also, envisages to actually capture and also compare and contrast with a more intercultural perspective across global borders and global contexts. So I think it is a very, very exciting kind of a space where we are actually embarking upon. This picture, basically, a lot of these pictures that I'm going to show you today are pictures from my field work in different parts of North India, and particularly I'm talking today about the India-Bangladesh border. And the India-Bangladesh border is a fairly long border. It's one of the longest borders that India shares with any different country, and it goes right from the west in West Bengal right to the east in Northeast India, encompassing several provinces of India. And we also know the history of very, very contested histories and fragmented histories about how the enclaves along the India-Bangladesh border were settled, and some of them are yet to be settled in fully meaningful context for people living in those. So you can see the border here, the border line, the fence here, and the clothes that actually are hung just along the fence are the lived experiences of people living along this border line. And this is what our research also, in a sense, when I say our research, I'm referring to the collective research that is actually being done in India in terms of, and especially in Northeast India. And this conference, the theme of this conference also comes in very well in terms of how we contextualize that in terms of borders, and we talk about the edges. And the interfaces, about how the lived experiences of communities along borders also reflect, and as to how we can actually interface that alternative worldviews, talk about pluralities, talk about scales, and also, as Ted was just talking about just now, in the context of Japan, that Japan is contesting a marginal scraps of land. But here in the India-Bangladesh context, we are actually talking about a lot of land which involves marginalized communities living along in the Indian context. So in that sense, this marginal scraps of land versus the marginalized peoples of the borderland, and that is a very, very interesting contrast which we also need to bring. In that, it brings in the borders, the edges, the interfaces, the pluralities, the scales, and then the scaffolding and the diversity of issues that actually connect the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And that makes it quite a deep insight into how 21st century borders actually have saved and are going to save in the future. So in that context, This is a picture from the Dauki-Tamavil border checkpoint in the India-Bangladesh border. And here you can see the mark there saying no mask, no entry. And there's a cow strolling by, grazing around. Actually, for the cow, it is very easy for go between India and Bangladesh, but it's very hard for people, to go between them. And also, that's the symbol of the army there. One of the residents of the DSF who actually guards this border from the Indian side, and the border guard Bangladesh who guards it from the other side. So the COVID pandemic, I just bring that context here because the COVID pandemic was used by the DCC of India during this time from 2020, early 2020 to 2021 to fence a lot of the borders which are unfenced in the Indian-Bangladesh border. And there was a lot of protests against by local communities over a lot of many years or decades to actually resist the fencing of these borders, because the local communities had a very, very interdependent relationship with Bangladesh from the Meghalaya side, and they were active border markets and traditional markets which were thriving, and the basket of goods traded between these communities was very, very interdependent, and people used to grow what is required in Bangladesh, and what in Bangladesh also, and there was a larger food basket which was encompassing these borders. There were familial ties, there were ties of kinship, there were, all of these, and we were also talked about meeting points of families, and about land, the basic aspect of land. So, this is the border picture that I've taken from the India-Bangladesh border. You can see the borders that were demarcated by the colonial administration here were very, very sharp. It was the hills were India and the plains were Bangladesh. So you can actually see this is the divide of the hills and the plains start. On your right, you can see that's Bangladesh, and on your left, there's Meghalaya, and that's India. And this is a picture taken in 2019 when there was an active protest by local communities here to not build this fence. And the government already awarded contracts to actually start building this fence up there. But then the local communities were saying that no, we don't want a fence, because it will destroy markets, the traditional markets that have been thriving for many decades, and the exchanges have been a free flow of people. But this is the next picture is of 2021 of the same place. And this is the fences come out. And so the state, Indian state, has used this time to make this border during the pandemic, where people were ordered to stay home and not come out. And that is how the scale has happened during the pandemic. And this is the transformation that we see. And this is quite a very, very, absolute fence, and very, very, thick, in a sense, in terms of how people are advised not to go near the fence because they're electrified and all that. And there's a lot of, messages given to the common people that don't go near the fence at all. So these spaces are very, very cut out through the geography now. You can see that it cuts through forests and actually, divides community land. I was actually traveling after in 2021 when I had the opportunity to go to the borderland again. Here, I'm an old friend who had land near the fence, farmland. And I asked him that let's go to your farmland. And we used to also go earlier with Ted, we had gone there for, into the forest. And I asked him, let's go. And he said, okay, let's go. And we went near the fence, and the BSF person was quick to actually chase us away. But this person, he said that my land is here. I have the right to go to my land and access my land. But the BSF person said, no, go to Shillong, take permission, come back, and then we will see if you can access your land. And that is what is the lived experience now. where you actually denied access to your own land. I was an outsider, I was coming from Assam, but that person was from the village nearby and had land. This is a picture of a border hut, which is very, very well managed and safe by the Indian government. The Indian government always advertises these border huts as kind of the examples of connectivity between India and Bangladesh. Saying that there are a total of 4 border huts on this side of the border, in the northeast Indian side, 2 in Meghalaya and 2 in Tripura. And this is a handcart trader, a small trader waiting with the BSF. You can see the BSF personnel stand sitting there, where it will go under some checks and then it will be allowed to pass. So the point here is that all of these traditional border markets that were already existent, for a state, you have to actually first, in order to make connectivity, you have to first fence and close it, and then open it. While there's already certain kinds of connectivity in the alternative, in the marginal, in a community space, this connectivity is always there. But you have to first infrastructure the space, close the fence, and then only open it in order to that to be national, in order that to be a symbol of the state. So that is one. These are small rivers actually, which are, you can see that it's filled up with land in the middle of this river, and to actually bring the fence between India and Bangladesh. So these ecologies are being ruptured. The larger bioregion or the larger ecoregion, so to say, which is in the alternative framing of the larger of the communities living by the border line, is being ruptured in this manner, where important ecologies, important flows are being ruptured in order to place the border on the ground. This is the picture of a market, which actually was where Ted and me, we have been documenting over many years now, and we have also written some articles about it. And this is the space of the informal markets that I was speaking about. This was going on for decades, and these are now the border, the fence has actually come up here, and these are no longer existent. And the whole basket of communities, what we call the food basket of the region is being bordered by the destruction of these traditional markets. And that has a very, very deep impact on communities living along these borders. Because it directly impacts the livelihood and it directly impacts the cultural meanings attached to the land. This is another picture from 2021 where you can see the border line that was being built there, just ends there, and then the river is there. And then it will start from the other side. But from the river point of view, I think they will use some laser technology here because it's a bigger river, and you cannot, in the flood time, this actually is a very big raging river, and hence the fence will be washed away. So the Indian government has made some technology in order to fix some laser mechanism here to guard the border. So this is what is the edges of the border, where we can actually see the edges very distinctly here. And this again another border fence that is sunny, and everyone is stopping there, just in the middle of the. So in that sense, these are the edges, which again this is another border line, where you can actually see the edge, and from here onwards, then the fence has not been built. So it's a kind of ongoing conversation, and communities have been able to till now navigate, negotiate at various levels as to how the borders are put in place, not put in place. But the pandemic time has been used in many of these cases to actually fill up these gaps, fence up the border, and infrastructure it to a certain point, and securitize it to a certain point that these interfaces now on both sides of the border no longer happen. So in that sense, the people-to-people connectivity, the regional
larger frame, the everyday lives at the borders, all of these, becomes very, very fragmented in terms of how farming practices happen. And this also reflects a very, very deep democratic deficit. In India is also called is one of the largest democracies in the world. But there is this larger deep democratic deficit among minorities and what I now call as minority geographies. And the whole aspect of how we don't only talk about minority communities in India, but we talk about minority geographies in India, and how minority geographies are being sidelined and constantly marginalized through such bordering practices of the state. And these borderlands, again, these bordering practices also bring in the same limelight of these minority geographies only being corridor spaces in the larger frame of the Act East policy or the Look East policy which was earlier. So we do not, I come from the same region, Northeast India. So Northeast India does not want to be just merely a corridor space, an infrastructure corridor space, but we want meaningful participation in the economic connectivity in the terms of how this will actually go forward in the future. But it is more from the state perspective, it is more kind of a more corridor infrastructure space and comes out from that kind of this minority geography point of view and also democratic deficit. So traditional knowledge that is vested in the communities, indigenous worldviews are sidelined, are systemically sidelined by these bordering practices. And I think that further research is required to understand this friction, to understand the processes of exclusion, the inequality that is coming in, and that is deeply embedded by such infrastructure. And also, I just like to also end by saying this, that, the partition that India saw between India and Pakistan and also Bangladesh, as the Pakistani author Wazir talks that it's a long partition, and partition is still going on. It's an ongoing partition. And these are the examples. The fencing project that is happening now is a living example of ongoing partition that the communities are now having to face even today. And we need to examine that much more closely. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nitsa. We have put the most serious face in your last words, but it's true that probably much more research is needed. And then to something that is shared also with us, how to connect the results of the research with policymaking, also connected with integration processes, etc. But happy to be in an association that can unite different ideas from different continents. Perhaps we are getting a lot of inspiration. Perhaps you can also get inspired. Together we are strong. Thanks a lot. And now I will invite our discussant, Sanjay Chaturveda. He's coming from the South Asian University in Delhi. Chaturveda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me once again thank the Association for Borderland Studies, and I underline this borderland. And I was wondering, it could have also been the Association of Border Studies, but very appropriately, the emphasis has always been on borderlands, which I think opens up much more space for critical reflection and engagement. And to Ben Gurion University once again, Professor Manuel, Professor David Newman, sincere thanks for giving me this opportunity. Three very important, fascinating presentations. Please allow me, Mr. Chairman, not so much to discuss them, but to just tease out some of the insights that I could gather or garner from these presentations and put them on the table in the hope that all the three presenters may find something useful in these reflections. Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, my colleague, we have worked together, comes from a university, we come from a university where the motto is knowledge without borders. And I think that is very appropriate, knowledge without borders, because listening to him, I was wondering that not just about IR and South Asia international relations, but as a discipline, that if we want the IR as a discipline to directly address the question of boundaries and borders, then I think it will not be possible to do so without questioning the disciplinary boundary in the first place. The way in which the discipline of international relations has been imagined, has been practiced, the way it was founded, very appropriately called by critical IR scholarship as an American discipline, for political science, for social science discipline. And the fact that the discipline of international relations has evolved through various turns and divorces. And now we see very important sociological terms, we see ideation of emotional terms, the discipline of international relations. And at South Asian University, attempt has been to sort of build up a sociologically informed international relations of South Asia, so South Asian international relations. It is still a work in progress, but I think if we really want to go beyond the real sense, as Dhananjay pointed out, then it would be very, very important for us to try to aim at the non-disciplinary approach. It's not even multidisciplinary, but non-disciplinary approach to border studies. In a way, it is good for border studies that it remains border studies. I believe for a very long time, we have seen polar studies, we have seen migration studies, we have seen ocean studies, we have seen border studies. And I think if we were to compare the studies and the associations with disciplines and departments, then one can even argue that the studies and associations probably are doing much better in today's contemporary context than the disciplines and the departments. So if that is the case, then my solution to Dhananjay would be to really push the boundaries of the discipline of international relations, because we know that in India, and this is where the post-colonial, post-partition context becomes very important, the very domain of border studies has been taken over. I will not use the harsh word of Harvard hijack, but it has been taken over by strategic studies and security studies. One possible way forward could also be to, for example, look at the question of borders and boundaries from critical security lens. I'm reminded of, for example, Copenhagen School of International Relations. I agree that constructivist liberal approaches would be useful. Even different strands of realism might also be like, for example, liberalism would be useful. But if we were to follow, say, for example, Copenhagen School of International Relations, where it was Oliver's engagement with desecuritization. How do we desecuritize borders in the post-colonial, post-partition context? I think that would be a very, very useful basket of issues to address. And then I also feel that there is a very healthy debate which is taking place in the discipline of international relations, where we are trying to work out the Anthropocene international relations, which then reminds us of, for example, Simon Dolby's path-breaking work on what he calls Anthropocene geopolitics. So the moment we bring in the Anthropocene international relations perspective, I think we are able to break through the cartographic imprisonment of territorial trap and look at various other unexplored dimensions. So that is all that I can think of as far as Dr. Dhananjay's very important, very fascinating presentation is concerned. Coming to Dr. Edward Boyle's presentation. If Edward is listening to me, then Edward, please allow me to reflect very briefly on what you have said and also what you have also written in your abstract, because I don't want to lose that opportunity of engaging with your abstract, because this is really very fascinating, very important. So I will combine the two and just make a few observations for your consideration. First of all, I think it is a very useful contribution that you have made in the sense that you have taken us from the land continent to terrestrial understanding of borders and boundaries to the maritime domain. And I found your engagement with the question of the law of the sea very fascinating, because as somebody who is interested in ocean studies and maritime studies, I have been intrigued by the following. Number one, and this is where I think Japan and India also come into play, and that is the growing strategic significance of the island states. Not only in the Indian Ocean, but in the larger Indo-Pacific space that we are talking about. I was also very intrigued by your use of expression normative borders in East Asia, and your reference to UNCLOS. Now we know that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea also sits on the intersection of international law and geopolitics. So if island states are becoming important, if we see territorialization of islands, for example, the artificial islands that we see being constructed by China in South China Sea and the boundary disputes, one also is tempted, at least I am tempted, to look at exclusive economic zones of the island states as maritime borders. Now this, I know, is intriguing because up to 10 nautical miles we do have the territorial sea, which again is a part of state territory in the island territory. But then we also have this very different understanding of sovereignty right up to 200 nautical miles. If that is the case, then one can understand as to why Japan is so concerned as an island state about the islands that it has, talked about 70 islands, if Japan looks at the future of these island spaces and looks at these vast maritime economics, exclusive economic zones, and then also looks at questions like IUU fishing, and in South China Sea, also in other parts of the Pacific, a very big problem with IUU fishing with China. China's fishing fleet is playing a very important role. We have also recently seen developments with regard to China and the Marshall Islands. Then the question is, and this is your last point, that what India and Japan would do about this growing territorialization of the ocean space. And perhaps one way forward, which is already there, but these partnerships need to be further strengthened. And I'm here making a reference to Quad, for example, the Quadrilateral Security Alliance, and the larger Indo-Pacific space. And I'm reminded of the last meeting of Quad countries in Tokyo. And we know that former Prime Minister, late Prime Minister Abe has also made a very important contribution to this construct, this coalition called the Quad within the Indo-Pacific framework. And then I think together, looking beyond security and beyond classical geopolitics, it is quite possible for the Quad countries to also argue for a new imagination of the oceanic space. For example, I have come across a narrative which talks about very protected areas in South China Sea. It talks about the regional seas programs and their potential in the South China Sea. Because we know that climate change and the challenge of the Anthropocene taken together is going to have far-reaching consequences for South China Sea and its neighboring seas. For example, the Bay of Bengal, which is one of the largest marine ecosystems. So if we can, within a big project frame, your contribution, looking at it from Japan, the South China Sea, looking at the question of maritime boundaries and frontiers and the prospects of developing regional seas programs, then I think probably we are looking at what we are calling going beyond security and beyond classical geopolitics limits. So coming to the final presentation, again, I thought it was very, very fascinating. My first question, if I may pose, is that how do we define COVID-19 borders? Because we are looking at pandemic borders, right? And there's some very good critical scholarship about the pandemics. And the pandemic borders, listening to you, I thought also then unfold themselves on the intersection of the physical and the ideational, the physical and the emotional. And I'm reminded here of a very fascinating book which I recently read called Medicalizing Borders, which is on selection, containment, and quarantine since 1800. It was being published by Manchester University Press in 2021. Which then also reminds us, which I think is very relevant for India under this border, remains relatively unslow. Which is that it was not just the physical stopping the bodies from crossing the border, where both India and Bangladesh, the states on both the sides cooperated, where when the hearts, for example, were suspended for time to time. But we also saw something which was happening in other parts of the world, and that is the hardships that migrants face, particularly illegal, irregular migrants face. In the sense that it was not just these bodies crossing the borders, but these bodies were being seen as disease bodies and carriers, possible carriers of COVID infection. So we see some very intriguing intersection between the physicality of human body, the human body itself, and caste, color, race, and all those biases, that we see. We have seen it in many other parts of the world as well. Now, your point, you're absolutely right in saying that in South Asia, also in post-partition South Asia, we have this very serious mismatch. I think of two serious mismatches. The one, the ethnopolitics and geopolitics. And the second mismatch is between the ecological spaces and the geopolitical spaces, the ecological boundaries and the geopolitical boundaries. We see it more glaringly the way of Bengal in the case of the Sundarbans, but we also see over along the India-Bangladesh border, which is the river line. And we know that the borders and all these fencing exercises, they are also very paradoxical in the sense that they have tried to stop human mobility. But the pandemic has shown that when you destroy the natural habitat, you also then are not in a position, no border in the world will be able to stop the infection or the viruses from crossing the border. So you are trying to sort of ensure one kind of security, which is the state security or national security. But by doing so, you are seriously compromising not just the human security, but even what we have been discussing today, the ontological securities. So I thought if in your work, you can also look at that side, whether I have seen some narratives, but I don't have full data and information. But when it came to the India-Bangladesh border, how do we see that intersection between, between the, as I said, not just the human body, but also these intersections of all kinds. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is all that I have to share.
Thank you very much. I think it was an excellent discussion. My open was, you can see some smoke coming, some very interesting references. This book, we should know about it, Medicalizing Borders. I think it's after the experience with COVID, is something absolutely. This morning we were talking with some colleagues about the paradigm of open borders in Europe. Schengen made everything open, and suddenly with the COVID, we saw how some member states were closing the borders overnight. but they were closing the border when all the population was confined. So what for? The result was that what they were stopping were these essential workers that had to cross the border, for instance, from Vigo in Spain to the hospital in Porto where they work. With the closing of the border, they have to make 200 kilometers more. So arriving late to the hospital or resting less. In any case, a disaster. But they close the border, and they have to open the border, of course, 24 hours later. But then, in the second wave, they close the border again. And perhaps you remember, some days before Christmas, and all the supermarkets in Britain had real problems. And all these poor drivers were stuck at the border. So it's an issue. Sometimes the borders cannot be closed. See. Well, I think that we have had very interesting 3 presentations, a fantastic discussions, and I think now is the time for you to take the floor and to make remarks, questions, comments. Who would like to break the ice? And then, yeah, please take your seat. Gentlemen, I will pass you the. So Ted can also here.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Yes, I wanted to ask Dr. Rahman, in the Bangladesh border, I'm trying to understand, I understand that the agents on the ground are fairly weak, those who are trying to stop the border. Can you say something about who is pushing for continuing the building of the border? Who are the agents that are most responsible? Is it the military, or is it just what states do? I mean, is it who is really behind this idea? If you can say a little bit, I mean, is it just a security issue, or is there something? I'm just wondering if it's just the way that states behave in an almost instinctive manner is to create borders, or are there some interests here that we're not fully aware of?
We don't have a second mic, do we? No. Oh, well, then don't worry. I will make the transfer.
Thank you for your question. Yes, in the sense of how the borders are also seen by the state in terms of stopping the migration from Bangladesh to India. And in recent years, this has also acquired quite a lot of proportion in context of the Citizenship Amendment Act, which has been passed in India, which actually also brings in an added layer of discrimination against religious minorities in the context of the citizenship law that is prevailing in India. So, in order to seal the border, the India-Bangladesh border and India-Pakistan border is an unfinished business of the country. And it is also a very, very electorally connected kind of a policy. So whenever elections come, the border contractors are up there on the ground, starting to make fences on those unfinished places. So, and that is what imagery actually is, that we are now protecting you from the outsider. So this insider-outsider narrative, which is very, very dominant in the Bangladesh border, is the driving force between the fencing process. Thank you.
I came down here just so you didn't have to walk. So, oh, thanks. It's okay. Okay. This is for Dan and Jay. I share your concern about the fact that it's really important to engage China, but China's not engaging. And I'm talking on a scholarship sort of vein. And I think you realize that before COVID, there was a growing exchange of scholarly interaction between Chinese scholars and Western scholars, and scholars from India and so on. And your colleagues, a number of people have traveled to China and had an opportunity to engage with scholars. And since COVID, which has just stopped in China by now. January, beginning of January, they've finally allowed some interaction, allowed people to move not only out of the country, but out of their own communities. And so I've had some work with China over the years, and I'm finding that the Chinese scholars are now ready to re-engage. Unfortunately, the geopolitical situation has worsened. Canada, the United States, Western European countries are all having major issues with China, and that is making the scholars very, very shy about engagement. So we have a problem. We have a really major problem here. I've looked into trying to get a research visa to go back to China, and I'm having severe difficulties trying to even get an appointment to talk to someone at the embassy. So what do we do, Dan and Jay? In your regional context, you cannot avoid China. There's just absolutely no way. India, Pakistan, all of these countries are engaged. Now, fortunately, we have a number of Chinese scholars who are in the United States, who are in Canada, and they are interested in borders and they are engaging with us. But that's only a part of what needs to be developed. Do you have any thoughts on how that important hole can be filled?
I think it's a very difficult question, but what I feel is, see, China is not, it's 1.4 billion people we're talking about. When we talk about China, we're talking about the second largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
We're talking about the rising assertive China that is redefining the connectivity in the whole of the world. It's not merely South Asia, it's Africa. It's also Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
It's also about Central Asia.
Yeah.
And the changing geopolitics of the world, how can we avoid non-engagement with China?
Yeah.
So I think in my limited own experience, we have now very difficulty interacting with Chinese scholars, even in India. It's been just continuously being watched from the state, what our interactions are. But even if some are settled in Europe or in America, those are willing to speak, because their perspective is very, very important. Very recently, I'm engaging with a colleague who's from India and is teaching in China from last 9 years. And he's bringing some of those perspectives. He knows Chinese language very well and well accepted within the academic community of China. So we need to engage with these people to also understand a little bit more about China. My point is that we can't ignore China, and this is a critical time. Otherwise, the future generation will ask what the modern studies scholars were doing when China was actually changing the maps, connectivity, and geopolitics of the world. China is doing it. So we cannot be blind to this. We cannot be ignorant to this fact.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question, Manuel.
My first point is simply that I would love to hear Ted and Dhananjay and Mirza's answers to Sanjay's comments. I think it's very important that we hear them. Ted, I hope you hear me. That I would like you to answer Sanjay at some point. Not right now, but in a couple of minutes. So my comments on the papers is that, yes, I think we cannot just look at security and economy to understand Southeast Asia either. And I think that some of the suggestions actually, it has, some of the suggestions that Sanjay's raised are really valid. Looking at the continent school, I think Busan's work, for instance, is fundamental here, because it's a multi-pronged approach to security. And it's also an approach that suggests in a way, an evolution of both the military bureaucracy, but also the securitization or the strategic awareness of agencies within states that are, in a way, overlooking some fundamental elements of the security of states, such as food security, which for the longest time, for instance, in Europe and North America, have never been associated with security issues, right? And I think that's a really important aspect in any relationship between states. So it's a broadening of the understanding of diplomatic relations. In the case of anthropological security, which Sanjay raised as well, it's a very important aspect. The work of Simon Dalby on this is basically arguing that a new governance has to rise, right? There need to be strategy thinking to go there. And so I think if we think about international relations and we want to theorize it, at least we can conceptually open some of the ideas, and then we've got problems because military security is actually just a small part of what security is made of. And military security is not an ideal answer, but also from the bureaucratic part of what the military is, we've got functional issues when all we can handle is weapons, because we need the military bureaucratic capacity to, for instance, manage other parts of security, which has to do, for instance, with non-militarized or non-weaponized capacities, the management of camps, the management of resources, energy, and the management of mobility, and so on and so forth. They raise those questions for the European Union. And I think Europe has been misunderstood as an analytical case study by realists for a long time. Because the answer of the Europeans in the post-1990s was actually to embrace some of those Danish concepts and go beyond what Europe's answer to military security should be, to say we need agencies that are actually fully aware of those multi-pronged approach to security. I think it's a good question for other parts of the world. For Ted, I have to say that I don't know how well you hear me, Ted. And I'm trying to speak in the microphone as well as I can, so you can hear me. But that Sanjay's answer to your comments was also about the paper proposal. And one of the things that struck me is that the presentation that you gave us is certainly about Pillar 1, but the paper proposal is much more into Pillar 2. And I was wondering if you were trying to bridge the two pillars, which was one of the big discussions at the end of the workshop on Sunday. We don't have to produce paper that systematically bridge across security or Anthropocene and so on and so forth. But we need to refer to the integrity of the grant, as I said, the questions within each pillar. Both ideas are interesting to be, obviously, to be glad, to the 21st century borders. Whether you want to look at, mobility and the understanding of identity by Japanese policymakers when it comes to, issues that have to do with the workforce, but also the much more, and that's a form of human geopolitics, right? But also the geopolitics of territory as it is understood by the UNCLOS, which is, in my mind, the UNCLOS is amazing because it's a text where we talk about water, but every point of reference is always land or islands, which makes life extremely difficult for island states. And even though, Japan has about 75 major islands, and I know that overall, it's about 5,000 rocks as well. So it's much more complex. And knowing, for instance, that a district of Tokyo, which is a municipality, is actually located 2,200 kilometers away in the Pacific Sea, is something I never forget, because it is a completely different understanding of that geopolitics. So I think both projects are really interesting. They don't entirely overlap with each other, but I think, I would like to know more of how you want to articulate, in a way, these projects. And I'll come back to this. The Pillar 1 project on mobility is really interesting, and it continues the book that you just published with Naomi that we initiated at the University of Hokkaido, I think 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And I understand it as really important to the future of the workforce and mobility policies, immigration policies in Japan. But I find the other work also super interesting. So I would love to hear more about this. And then for you, Misra, I was thinking that, the paper is great, focusing on political ecologies and the whole idea of COVID and how COVID was used as a period to basically push very hard on infrastructures, right? But what's really fascinating is the connection between the local and the global and the infrastructures of security, right? It's like trying to connect basically both pillars 1 and 2, claims of nationhood maybe, or sovereign claims by certain minority populations, and how it's fundamentally disturbed by, well, yes, political ecologies, or, and Sanjay here, again, kind of stole the carpet away from me there, but it's very important to address this, is that we are discussing we're discussing something that is fascinating, but we need to focus on this idea of the diversity of bordering processes, right? And how, for instance, the border security of COVID has absolutely nothing to do with the territorial space. It's actually a biological security, which is actually a space around the human being that is contaminated, and we know it's 6 feet. If we lived in bubbles 6 feet apart from each other, so how do we kind of reconcile this, both conceptually, but also when we do our studies? I really like the idea of trying to connect, major infrastructures to the idea of security. On the other hand, we cannot just play in the pond of states' approaches to this. They used the COVID crisis, certain states, for purposes that had nothing to do with human security, but had to do with geopolitical security. And so we kind of need to split those concepts a little. Anyway, just some feedback on this. Thank you so much.
And you have to do it in 5 minutes, including perhaps a reaction from Sam. Because we were asked to close 10 minutes before. And there's another question. Do you want me to take this question? Or we
can take it.
And then we...
Yeah, sure. My query is to Mirza, and you showed in your slide the border fencing between India and Bangladesh. I think there are 740 kilometers border fencing between the Indian state of Tripura and then Bangladesh. And my query is, was the fencing constructed bilaterally or unilaterally? And the next one, what is the impact on the people-to-people relation between India and Bangladesh? And the last query, small query, what the remaining portion between the territory of India and Bangladesh has not yet been fenced. What is the reason? What may be the reason? Political or social or technical reason? What is your observations? Thank you.
We are looking forward to your answers, but you have to be very brief.
Yeah, thank you so much. First, I would just like to address Professor Sandesh's comments, and I take them fully, and we definitely need to talk about digitalization of borders in terms of in terms of what you talk about how COVID-19 borders are constituted. And tell me, we had written a paper for big review in 2019 about the border sector on the Bangladesh border, and that addressed some of these issues that you were highlighting, and I'm happy to share that with you. It's in the big review, and I will share that with you. And that also addresses this whole point about how it was used, COVID-19, the pandemic, the disease bodies, as you speak, was used, because for many years, the state was actually telling the local people that they're going to steal your crops, they're going to steal your wilderness, they're going to come and, be thieves in the night that will come and, steal everything that you have. But all the people were resisting bringing of the fence. But when they said that disease will come, now this is a much more kind of a big threat. That disease is not only going to come to you, but you're actually also threatening the integrity of India. You're going to also threaten people out in inland of Meghalaya and inland of North India. And that is what was invoked during that time. And that is very fascinating. And we have also addressed that somewhat in our article, and I will share that with you. And that also comes similar to what you were saying. It was because there was this indigenous resources and kind of resistance, not resistance, resistance towards building the fence in certain sections in Meghalaya, for example. In West Bengal, it has been much more nuanced history. In Tripura, there is also a different kind of history. So, in that sense, as I was referring to the long partition, that this is a continuing project. And at various stages, there are indigenous resistance, and we will also see, for example, when this was invoked, there was a question of compensation. When they said that, oh, the thieves will come and steal your crops, then the government said, okay, we'll compensate you for the land where we build the fence. But when the disease bodies are going to come, no question of compensation. It is in the national interest that we're going to be forego the compensation and allow to build the fence. So a lot of villages in the Meghalaya border, the Bangladesh border, actually had to forego, even though they ready to forego the compensation. And so they were not even paid because they were doing this in the service of the nation.
I don't know how to comment a couple of issues, and let me say this with the risk of appearing realists, which I am not. That the changing geopolitics of the world, today somebody has done a tweet saying we are in a world of balloons now, referring to balloons between China and America. Look at one of the most stable regions of the world, Europe, where it's a matter of geopolitics, and definitely this will impact European borders in many long years to come. Look at when the world was fighting pandemic, India and China were fighting each other on the borders. So there is a very strong shift in the world, and we as borders can't be, as I said, ignorant to all these changes. So this is why I wanted to argue, and this is a work in progress, that one thing is how we are going to look at, and Mirza also his presentation. It was about continuous partition. In my presentation, I talked about the bordering processes is continuing in South Asia in different ways and form. And let me say this, it's not as an IR scholar. It's fine, but at the end of the day, we are also prisoners of our own, discipline somewhere. So whatever we think is going to be impacted by that. So the world is on the verge of changes. The competition between US and China is no longer an imagination. It's very much there. It's very much there in terms of the trade wars, Taiwan, Russia, even Putin issuing a threat of a nuclear catastrophe in that had happened, that is on record. So these practical things really need to be taken into consideration if we have to look at the border studies, particularly in the context of South Asia, because the competition is no longer friendly competition between India and China. It's a death of 43 soldiers on the Chinese side and 20 soldiers on the Indian side that have happened. That's a reality now. So I feel that one thing that, as my paper argued, I wanted to argue that how we are looking at borders in South Asia. My main fundamental argument here is that realism is going to dominate, and yet we really need to shift as a scholars. And we also have to look at some of the geocultural realities of the region, and that is the hope for me. So that is the entire thing I wanted to bring the paper. As I said, it's a work in progress, and I'm going to publish definitely, and then maybe it will create more debate or discussions and then maybe more response. So that's what I would say from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, we will give the floor to Ted. Please, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay and Emmanuel. So, sorry. Briefly to Emmanuel. So what I was trying to present today was ideas for I guess a number of different papers that I hope maybe students could be involved in the writing of. So that's why it's a little bit disparate. On the like the islands themselves and island as part of Japan's territory. I mean, what I find. So Sanjay, apologies, I couldn't hear your comments very well. When people are speaking at the dais, it echoes really badly. But what I find really fascinating about this case is, UN Convention of the Law of the Sea is this multilateral agreement that's not technically about borders at all, but that was introduced entirely to sort of remove contestation from maritime areas. And particularly in East Asia, it seems it's had the effect of like vastly aggravating contestation as these states sort of claimed borders out to the edge of the EEZs. And it just sort of both the reverse of what was intended by this agreement, but also how the agreement has been nationalized in the region, I think is sort of very instructive for how borders have been sort of becoming increasingly important in the last 20 years and continuing to be so into the present. Regarding, and then sort of thinking about Japan and maritime space, I mentioned about how with migration, we sort of see this movement of the border out and private organizations being involved. This is true also in maritime space, as well as organizations like Sasakawa become increasingly involved in sort of buying Coast Guard vessels, both for Japan, but also for like other Pacific Island states in which they can patrol their maritime EEZs against other countries, particularly associated with fishing in various parts of the world. I think you asked about the Quad and stuff as well. I don't think I have time to do it justice now. So I'd just like to conclude. I hope we can maybe converse somewhere where I can hear you properly in the future. But thank you to you and everyone.
Thank you very much. We could hear you very well. Thanks a lot. Perhaps our discussant would like to have a couple of words, or like, are you happy? Okay, everybody's happy? Well,
just final observation which I have. Since we had two wonderful observations on South Asia and one from Japan, as an enthusiast of border studies in South Asia, I have a very small query which may be treated as an immature as well. But what I have studied so far and I have read and I have understood, listened, everything, we are still talking about the state-centric borders. Why we are trapped into the understanding which quote unquote, Dr. Tripathi has said, imperial anxiety. What is our contribution to the border studies? Are we again going to replicate the very realistic understanding of the West-centric IR, or are we going to produce the South Asian set of understanding all the theories and concepts which are going to guide the generations to come to understand what is their border? So that is the final conclusion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It will be the opening of a new panel for next session. You want to take the floor?
No.
But then we got it. We take it home. Well, thank you very much, dear speakers. Thank you very much, dear discussant. Thank you very much, those who made the contributions. And thanks to our audience. There is nobody else sitting down listening to. Everybody's eating, drinking. So we have all.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you so much.
Martin, thanks so much for sharing this session with so much dynamism.
I feel privileged.
You know, it's hard to be.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Ted.
Bye, Ted.
Thanks so much.
Shall we take a picture?
Yes. Take a picture.
That's embarrassing for me, this.
You can take a picture.
Usually Ted around. The mic here, okay?
He can only see us. Oh, so sorry. Okay, thank you. With Ted in the.
Yes, picture. Can you please, okay.
Ted, stay with us.
Lactosis.
That's okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. See you guys. Have a good time.
I feel privileged. I don't have paid to do this. What actually it is. And this book is.
That's some of the people who decide to do it.
Oh, well, it would be great. I give you a start instruction. Because, you know, I'm really busy, but my profession is, I'm a medical doctor. So then I have things a lot. I give you mine anyway. I said it was. So I said it to either we will do it in the next hours or you have my. Okay, great. Perhaps I will read it tonight. You still want more?
Okay. There was music at certain point, and then
It's a kind of celebration.
with the party.